A very warm welcome to you. Welcome to another great episode of My Body the Guitar with Karla Linn Merrifield. Great to see you, Karla.
And Paul Garthwaite. Nice
All
to
right.
see you, Paul.
Well, this week, an incredible subject. Tell us about it.
Well, we're going to be talking about Robert Johnson. Probably, I don't know, the most important, among the most important of the early guitar, 20th century, when the guitar took off. I mean, just, this is America at its, that blues explosion that he really tapped into with a phenomenal talent. I mean, it wasn't like the blues didn't exist already, but boy, what he did and what he was able to give to us these many, many years later is just, it's astounding what he did, from a life of just awful poverty, certainly the black in the delta of the Mississippi River in the 30s, tough existence that he just followed his dream completely. There was, no distractions. He had something that he wanted to do in this world, and he did it for a short spell before, he died. So, great gift to the world of music.
Well, let's see the poem, Karla, because it's a beautiful poem.
Okay. I'll just read it, and then we'll talk about it as we always do. It's called Elemental Magic. Oh, ye mighty juke joints of the cotton fried Delta blues, attend this jiving poem and guard these syncopated lines by the air that is his breath, and in the name of Robert Johnson, may I write. Oh, ye mighty fine lover boy of red hot triplet rift mamas, attend these randy flamed stanzas and guard these lust smoked words by the fire in his body, and in the name of Robert Johnson, may I sing. Oh, ye mighty midnight of crossroads of hoodoo and juju, attend these incantationally licked lyrics and guard their fully fretboarded, haunted syllables by the tears of his primal, woman-tempted heart, and in the name of Robert Johnson, may I spin my web. Oh, ye mighty ramblin', meat barrelin', bottleneck boogie, angst and urgency, attend these peculiar tunings and guard this alphabet, runes symbolic, by the grit of his dirt road, dirt farm, mud-lined spirit, and in the name of Robert Johnson, may I dream our devil's music.
Where do we start? Can I start with the title, Karla? Elemental Magic.
Right. This poem is actually based on the Wiccan, white witches, whatever you want to call them, the Wiccan incantation that is chanted to create what a symbolic circle. So if a bunch of Wiccans are getting together, a coven, right, to do their ritual, the first thing that happens is you cast a circle, and everything that happens then henceforward in the ceremony happens within this symbolic circle. So I went back to the original incantation, how, and what it does when you're casting a circle is you're talking to the four directions, the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. And each direction has an element in the old, not certainly not the periodic table, but the old medieval tradition that, there were four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And that are associated with the the four cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. And what I did, I decided that, it just like struck me at 4:00 in the morning one day, as I've been pondering what I was going to do for Robert Johnson, that he would understand. He would understand, given his background in the Deep South in that era, when among the Black community there was this heavy duty orientation to hoodoo, juju, whatever you want to call it. So he would understand if I'm adopting this mode of my, the white woman Wiccan tradition that came out of the Druids, the Celts. He would understand that this is how I wanted to speak to him or do him honor. So I've basically, what I'm doing with the poem is casting a circle around Robert Johnson and me as the poet, and we're in that magic space, which is what music and poetry is anyway, I think, to a great degree. How we practice, magic in this world through our art. Okay. And I think he would have understood this perfectly. That this is the strategy that I took for this. So I'm just borrowing certainly the Christian tradition. If I started reciting the Apostles' Creed, everybody would know, the Christian world would know what that was. In the Wiccan world, or the world of magic, everybody would know what this was, and he would know what this was, even if he didn't have the word for it. And at a circle, this circle that it's all mental. It's just all up here, psychological. He would understand that this is what I'm doing, and then I've pulled us in together into this protected area where we can just be together as poet and the inspiring guitarist, who I'm asking for his magic to really enter my poem, is what I'm asking, in this protective area where nothing can touch us. So
I think it's totally successful, actually. I think whatever happened, there was great communication. Could we just go over the first stanza there, the first verse, Karla?
So I situate him in the first part of the poem, the air. Okay, we're dealing with the element of air, and it's his breath. And I situate us, the reader or the listener here, to this is where we're coming from. This is the I'm trying to get a feel for what I call the cotton fried Delta blues, which was certainly one of many of and you know this better than I do, Paul, the actual music history of the blues, and the difference between Delta blues, Chicago blues, Memphis blues. There are all these colorations of the blues, and his and Robert Johnson's was Delta blues that came out of the Mississippi Delta dirt farm area, sharecroppers, and the like, and their social scene, which was primarily around, there was church, but there was also then the juke joints, where this music got played, or from porch to porch in a sharecropping community, which is what Robert Johnson did a lot of, just going, meandering these little communities, and playing on front porches or in the yard, and if he was lucky then to get into he did get into some of the juke joints where people gathered on Friday and Saturday night, went nuts.
I think one of the aspects from a musical point of view from Robert Johnson is that he was making music on what wouldn't have been what we would call today great instruments. Because can you imagine playing outside in the humid temperatures, then it's cold at night and stuff, and the amount of dedication it would take to actually get good on the guitar, you would really have to work at it so much. Because, and at the time that this is the thing now, is that in 2021 we've got role models forever, but when Robert Johnson started, his role model would have been people like Louis Armstrong, possibly from
John Lee Hooker.
John, he was really before John Lee Hooker, and really it's people like Charlie Patton. So Robert Johnson's kind of out of literally the first major, one of the first major artists, basically out of the plantations, pretty much. I mean, and the fact that when he was playing, from a poetry point of view, I was going to ask you about this. Where does Hellhound on My Trail come in for, or Come Into My Kitchen, or Crossroads? These are, it's poetry wise. How would you class his lyrics?
Well, one of the observations I made after I drafted the poem, I don't know, first, third, fourth, fifth draft, as I wrote a little note to myself at the bottom, and I went, oh my God, this poem is just filled with hyphens, words that are hyphenated. And you can look at it on the page or listen to it, red hot triplet riffed, intentionally licked, meat barreling, bottleneck hyphen boogie. I mean, it's just filled with this hyphenated word pattern. And to me, I sat back and I just went, wow, how did that happen? And I was picking up, I was trying to do with my poem what he was doing with his boogie shuffles and whatnot. I was trying to imitate that or come close to it with words, and how they, how the words actually tumble out of your mouth or in your ear as you're reading silently. And I could hear him. And some of those just, meat barreling bottleneck boogie.
Yeah. Just to go with it, I can see a parallel there, Karla, with it, because Robert Johnson was a solo artist. For anyone watching, there's I think there's 36 recordings of him, and he worked as a solo artist. And the parallel for me there is the fact that you're working as a solo artist, as a poet. So right. when I'm listening to Robert Johnson, I'm listening to a guitar and a voice. I'm listening to a package of Robert Johnson. And when I read your poem, I'm acutely aware that I'm listening to your work as a solo artist.
Yes, right.
The fact that he was the band, he would, in fact, he used to, I just mentioned before we go any further, he used to tune his guitar differently. I've got a guitar with regular tuning here. So what he would do is, it's called a G tuning. So he would, if for any guitar players, what he would do is he would tune the B string, he'd leave the B string where it was. He would use the E string, the top E string, would go down to a D. And the A string would go down to a G. And then the E string would go down to a D. So what happens is that the guitar generally is tuned to what we call a minor chord. By changing this tuning, it becomes, so I can play chords by putting one finger across the neck. So if I'm playing with a slide, so I don't have to really, hello, I don't have to kind of think so much about what's going on, because everything's pretty much there. And then he would put his fingers on as well, you know, and play kind of chords. But because, and the reason why people change the tuning of the guitar, I think, is that when you play a chord, you don't have to put any fingers on, or just one finger, and you've got a song. And also for the voice, it's kind of it can suit the voice better. And people do this. So before we get back in the poem, just about this G tuning, is that Keith Richards got onto this and used the G tuning by listening to Robert Johnson. So all which is impossible to play in a regular tuning, because the last point about guitar tuning is that when you retune the guitar like this is, effectively, if it was a piano, you would be moving the notes in different places, because when you change the pitch of a string, it means that the note is getting longer or shorter, that the expanse is getting bigger. So what was an F sharp before is now not.
Right.
So this is why. But when you're making a big sound in a juke joint, not that I've ever done it, it can make a big sound because you can get all the strings in there and make a big sound. Because as you can imagine, when he's playing in a juke joint or something,
oh my God,
yeah, it's kind of
right.
the reason why also flamenco players play very loudly, because they've got to get over a taverna full of red wine and olive oil or whatever it is, you know. And it's the same with the juke joints, I think. So sorry, just a little aside. So I'll put a little aside in there about that, Karla. Let's continue with the poem because it's beautiful.
Okay.
Oh, before sorry, the bottleneck. I just want to mention what a bottleneck is to people. Is that the bottleneck literally? I'm using a piece of brass there, but what they would do in the early days is they would literally cut the top off a bottle, so they'd just have the neck. They would file it down, and they would use it as a slide. So it's sometimes called a slide because it slides over the strings. I don't press the notes down with my finger. I can do, but with a slide. And this also takes the guitar back to its African roots, because what we're doing is we're not dealing in notes related to keyboard. What we're doing in terms of intonation, which is tuning, we can slide any way we want. So we've got a more of a journey on the note, because we're, instead of going, I'm going, you've got all that. So it's really interesting on that side.
And he would move that bottleneck sometimes the entire length of the fretboard.
Yeah.
It was just all over that.
So it's very difficult for a solo artist of that time to create something that's kind of so interesting musically, but he's got all the right notes in all the right places.
Yeah. You know, I mean, and when you think he started out, I mean, his first guitar was made from, I mean, he made it from a cigar box.
Right, I didn't know
that was the body of the guitar was a cigar box, you know, with the sound hole cut out and pieced together like with a broom handle, with chicken wire string. I mean, he made his first guitar out of things that were around for thrown off, cast out, recycled, long before he actually owned a real guitar.
That's so interesting, Carla, because taking that principle, um, the first board instrument that I read about was 15 million years ago. I'm not quite sure. I'll get it right. 15, 15 million, yeah, years ago anyway. Basically, it was the hunters would put a bow in the ground. They would put their bow and arrow in the ground, and what they would do is pluck the string, and that would make a pitch.
Yes.
And essentially that's what's happening with Robert Johnson making his own instrument. And this is another link to Africa, because the first bowed instrument was found in Africa, and of course the blues comes from Africa without any shadow of a doubt. And that's the cradle of all music, I think. So the fact also, this is another great influence that I hadn't even thought about till we spoke, is the fact that the cigar box guitar is a big thing now.
Today?
Yeah.
No kidding.
4 strings, 3 or 4 strings guitar box.
Oh, I
and again,
love it.
So you've got these 3 strings, and you can play all music on there. It's really interesting how that the cigar box guitar is a big thing now. Actually, yeah, more and more people get them because you can tune it to an open chord, and you don't. It's not an easy route, but you don't have to. You can just put a slide on and kind of. And it also goes back to the Hawaiian roots of the electric guitar, because the first electric guitar was built for the Hawaiian market, the frying pan. And this is the same. There's an influence all over the world. People were doing the same things. They just call the music different styles.
Right, and they worked with materials that they had available, and if they had no money or very little money, which Robert Johnson was always scraping by, then they were able to still. I mean, to think, that mastery that he achieved in those 36 recordings that have come down to us. That it all started. Actually, it started with an instrument, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was one of those things. They would put up a couple metal strings, okay, say, stretched out chicken wire,
yes,
on the side of the house, the shack, and pluck those strings against the wall of the shanty. And then from there went to an actual cigar box that had a neck and a sound hole in a body. So yeah, primitive. Maybe that's the wrong word, or that's prejudicial right now. But when you think of primitive instrumentation, I'm sure we've been doing this for millennia before we came along, and the Robert Johnson and his ilk were fashioning these handmade guitars out of what was at hand.
And I think it's the determination to actually do that. To actually, because the guitar is I mean, essentially it's a piece of string under tension with a drum attached to it, basically.
Right.
But all the intricacies of that, and the fact that he died when he was 27, of one of the first of the 27 Club with Jimi Hendrix.
That's right.
Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, Amy Winehouse. I mean,
right. Stevie Ray.
Stevie Ray. Wow, I didn't know Stevie was. That's unbelievable. So that he achieved so much in such a short space of time.
So the poem, I grounded in those Delta blues, and then the second grouping where I'm calling on the fire in his body. Okay, the element is fire. Part of his part of his, I mean, what we know of him that has survived and been pieced together by biographers. I mean, he was a lover's boy. I mean, I mean, there was something about him. He loved women, and women loved him, and he got in a lot of trouble because of that. In fact, ended up dying because he was messing around with some man's woman, his wife. It's not absolutely 100% positively proven, but all the data and the things that we know from sheriff's reports, that that husband came after him and poisoned him, and he was gone. So there's the music. I mean, this is Robert Johnson in that short meteoric burst of creativity that still moves us today. There's the Delta blues. There's this whole thing going on with him that he was a ladies' man, and that I guess that speaks to, in a way, to the music in terms of its how primal it is. And then I go on, and the third, where I'm calling on the element water, his tears. The social background of Blacks at that time in the Deep South, with their orientation toward hoodoo, magic, magic, and then finally getting to the meaning of his songs, in terms of how the angst and urgency of his existence, that we go from the music to the women to the cultural, the crossroads, midnight, the devil, whatever, and then I bring us back to the actual grit, his earthy body, as was expressed in the music. So for me, an interesting progression of to pay him honor of who he was in his meteoric rise and demise, all these years later.
I think one of the things, Carla, with this the poem is that it really sums up the mysticism around him, because he supposedly sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads to be the world's greatest guitar player, and if he did, he got good value, I think.
Right.
I've said, but
right, and that's very much and that's part of the whole Robert Johnson mystique. Well, no, I mean, there's no devil, and he knew there was no devil, and yet, we over the years, we've bathed him in this kind of mysticism, to use your word. And there was something mystical about him. They had nothing, and of course, the blues was called the devil's music. Well, fine, all right, label it that way. It's magic. However, holy, unholy, it has nothing to do with it. So,
well, it's quite ironic, actually, that the blues and gospel music use exactly the same language. So, but the other aspect of the poem brings out when I'm looking through it is that his influence on culture now, because he was a role model. I mean, if you look at a guitar playing womanizer, that's been a role model for a hell of a lot of musicians over the years. And the fact that there's only, I think, 2 photographs, isn't there? I think 2 photographs, and you say there's 36 recordings of him. That's it. So that I think it's human nature to make up stories, isn't it?
Yes, because we want more of him. We wish we had, that he had lived longer, that there were more of him, that there were more recordings. I mean, when I was working on the poem itself, actually scribbling, as I've said before, I usually say to Alexa, play X, Y, or Z. So, play Robert Johnson. And in a sitting, writing this poem, just an initial draft, I listened to all 36 songs. I mean, it's that the opus is that limited that in a matter of a couple hours, you can listen to everything he ever recorded. And it's astonishing when you look against the creative work of, say, Jimmy Page. Okay, how many Led Zeppelin albums there are, and how long it would take you to listen, and from A to Z, all his work. And Robert Johnson, there's this very discreet 36 tunes, and that's it. Hellhound on My Trail, or Crossroad Blues, the classic. I believe, what's the Dust in the Broom?
Oh yeah, Dust My Broom, yeah.
Dust My Broom, which has all kinds of, sexual innuendos in it from his culture at the time. What does that really mean? So it's fascinating to me that here is this wondrous human being with a remarkable talent that I go back to it again. Meteoric, just Rose was there, did it. His dream came true, and then he was gone.
Another aspect to bring about Robert Johnson, and this comes out in the poem, is that I don't think he was famous in his life. I don't know much. I don't think he was like revered particularly in his he died 37. Is it 30? He died.
Yes, like that.
So
yeah.
He wasn't really famous in his own lifestyle. I mean, because no one of that in that era was particularly what we look at as today as celebrity. I mean, another aspect of the poem brings out so beautifully is the fact that there's a real parallel in the fact that when he made this music, he wasn't making this music to sell 1 million copies, although he would have loved to, and and have a gazillion hits on Instagram. He wasn't on about that time. This is
right.
The first time in recorded music. I think the blues, the reason why the blues is such an emotive and influential music is the fact that people are actually, for the first time in recorded history, in the history of recording, putting down absolutely in the moment deepest feelings on record. Because I love Caruso, I love classical music, and but there's a different process. But this is somebody sat in front of a microphone, basically getting their heart and going, "I'll put that in the microphone. I'm just going to, and there's no gloss on it. It is what it is, and that's what brought Eric Clapton in, because once music gets popular, it becomes commercial, and all of a sudden it becomes watered down. Whereas when we hear Robert Johnson, Charlie Patton, all Son House, all those great people, Big Bird Brunsey, Lead Belly, it's the genuine article. That's the source, and that's why Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, Eddie Van Halen, anyone heard this music and thought, God, this is real emotion rather than manufactured. I feel it's real emotion.
I think that's really, really valid, Paul. That no, I mean he earned, I don't know, nickels and dimes. I mean the labels that he was on, it was a black market, so it was very targeted, and there weren't that many pressings of the actual, and they went into jukeboxes in that particular distribution for that black label went into jukeboxes in black communities. So there wasn't this mass distribution. It was a very, they recorded him. It was on a targeted label for fellow black Americans, and that it crossed over, or that it seeped out, has to do, and I haven't read all that much about it. Who directly stepped up and started. Who was the next in line that made Robert Johnson move beyond that niche that he was slotted into. So there's like a post, before the Eric Claptons and Jimmy Pages, discovered him. Who helped carry the torch that opened that window wider from those very niche distribution models for Black labels.
I think it was people like B.B. King, Muddy Waters, Johnny Hooker, and then they became popular in the 50s and 60s, and then the big change was the British blues boom with people like the Stones and the Beatles, and the biggest one, of course, was Cream with Crossroads, because Eric Clapton, Jack Bruce, Ginger Baker were great fans of Cream, of Robert Johnson, and covering Crossroads, which is completely different from the original. And also they changed some of the words as well. It's not as Robert Johnson's words, but the fact that they brought Robert Johnson's name into the mass market.
Right.
And
that took 30 years almost for that to happen.
Yeah.
So you wonder what I wonder what was going on, like the first 10 years after he died, and what that heritage is. It's just, I don't know. He's such an anomaly. He's his own. There's nobody else like him. As much as you could say whether Hooker or Sunhouse or whoever, there's nobody like Robert Johnson.
I totally agree. And just to add to that, Karla, he's one of the guitar. This is an incredible thing. I think it's totally true. Is that if you play anything other than classical guitar maybe not so much, but any other style of guitar, whether you know it or not, you're influenced by Robert Johnson, like Chuck Berry, like Jimi Hendrix. That you cannot possibly get away from the fact, and why should you? That Robert Johnson is one of the pivot. I think in terms of music, for my money, he's as important as Mozart or Bach or Beethoven or any of those, because he made something that was we're looking at it almost 80 odd years later, but at the time it's so cutting edge that somebody solo could hold an audience. Not only that, hold an audience that's probably had a few drinks and there's clapping and shouting going on and stuff like that, and also the fact that it was acoustic guitar. It wasn't electric guitar. It's acoustic guitar. So he's got to make all that sound himself, and the drive to do that.
And they weren't. The guitars that came into his life, graduating, so to speak, from cigar box guitars. None of his guitars were really we know a few of them that he played. None of them were spectacular instruments. The one he ended up with, the Kalamazoo, it was a much, for him, improved instrument in terms of its construction and tonal qualities and everything. But there's no comparison to a Taylor or a Martin acoustic, and yet he did. It was very serviceable instrument. Did this magic?
It's a really interesting point you raised there, Karla, because I saw actually on Father's birthdays we bought him a copy of Rembrandt's The Night Watch. And it's like I looked at it, and how old is that painting? It's 300 years old. I don't know, something like whatever it is. And wherever I looked at it, it was like 3D. And I mean, it was obviously it was reproduction, but I looked at it, and when I looked into it, I didn't realize that Rembrandt would mix his own paints. You know, they would literally mix their own paints and the palettes and the sort of the, the brushes and stuff like that. And I think with Robert Johnson, it's the same type of thing, that he didn't really have, or what he had to work with. He had to kind of. Can you imagine how hard it was to get guitar strings in those days?
Yeah, and how expensive they were for someone who was basically putting the hat out on the, at the juke joint, or sitting on someone's porch with 12 sharecropper families throwing pennies into a hat, or the whatever. I mean, just getting guitar strings and replacing them. I mean, we think nothing of that. Every 3 months it's time to change the guitar strings. I can see they're starting to sound buzzy or whatever, and we just do it. But he would have had to really dig down into his pocket to do that.
Absolutely. Another aspect that really comes out of the poem, which is fabulous, is the fact that it's 2021 and we're talking about Robert Johnson. Is the fact that through the blues boom of people like Eric Clapton, Cream covering Robert Johnson, it's probably, I know it's a sensitive subject for certain, but it's the guitar or music has enabled people racially to come together so much, because Robert Johnson, not Robert Johnson, BB King could come could come sell out, theatres in the UK, Buddy Guy, all these. Once people heard and felt how good these people were, and I think it's for me, Robert Johnson. If I can, so I'm talking lost now. Sorry. It's the fact that with his articulation, what he did was, in a lot of music before, is kind of calculated. In fact, I'm going to play this phrase, but with Robert Johnson, with his articulation, I think, or with all the early blues players, this was the thing, is that they weren't just playing the notes; they were absolutely giving everything they've got to the notes. So instead of, going, you've got all this kind of. They weren't afraid to go for it, and I think that's the whole thing with the blues, and that's what Eric Clapton heard. I think he heard, my God, Robert Johnson did do, and with the guitar was imitating the voice. I'm not going to sing any blues tonight because it's talking about Robert Johnson.
Well, I'm certainly not.
But like a voice would go, and with a piano, you kind of. But with a slide, it's so expressive. And when he goes up the top, that's a long way, as you said earlier, that's a long way to go. So it's the fact that you can hear him put in it. Santana would call it universal tone, I think, and that's the key. He has the universal tone because what he's putting everything into his music, and thank God they recorded it.
Yeah,
that's the thing. I think I was going to ask you. There's a couple of lines in the poem, which is the verse that goes, "Oh ye mighty midnight of crossroads, hoodoo and juju." That verse there. Could you just talk about that, because that's incantation?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is I was trying, and it's a delicate thing to do as a white person, much less a white female, to try and step into a Black person's life. I mean, my own neighbors, much less someone from the deep South in the 30s. And I really felt part of it was I had, to somehow bridge a cult. There's the human connection. All right, there's the music. All right, the Delta blues, and then there's the the fact that he was a flesh and blood male who loved women, and that human dimension, that he was someone who inhabited a body that loved women, and then the spiritual, that social environment. Sure, I mean, the uh, the deep South is populated with people who inculcated with Christianity, but boy, the Black community has some other stuff going on, and I think that's why I really thought it was important to capture "Oh Ye Mighty Midnight" of Crossroads of Hoodoo and Juju. Yeah, well, there's this whole thing with Robert Johnson and the devil, and he sold his soul, so that's context. But for his growing up as he did, where he did, when he did, there was you got somebody's put nails chicken feet to the front door of your shanty. There's some kind of bad mojo coming down from that, and I think that was part of my being able to feel for him, and that's a context that he came out of, that I can kind of relate to through this, doing the Wiccan thing, the pagan Wiccan thing, that I could relate to. And I think it was very important. And there are certainly several songs out of those 36 that allude, obviously the lyrics are there, that talk about this dimension of the culture that he grew up in, that there was this thing, a practice that was common among his neighbors, his family, such as it was, that he was part of. And I thought that's a critical part, especially because of the BS about selling his soul to the devil. Regardless of that, that's our imposition on him, or how he came down to us, by historians who, oh yeah. But it was very much a part of him. And I feel it in his music, that there's that kind of primal spiritual connection with what he's doing with his music to that part of that aspect of his culture that he grew up in. I'm sure I mean, I can imagine, the women that he hung with, they knew they knew if they wanted to cast a spell on somebody or help somebody through their, chicken feet or whatever it was. I mean, that's like the common image, is the chicken feet, that's used in that particular spiritual tradition. That he would understand that that's part of, he's going to help me through his orientation, his spiritual orientation. I know there's the Christian, overlay, but underneath there's this, hoodoo going on that was part and parcel of his life and his world that he moved through. And boy, somebody puts an evil eye on you. I mean, he would have known that. So this is, me kind of prying open, Robert, I understand. This is part of your magic, and you're helping me spin my web, which is words, rather than music, through that spiritual orientation that he was exposed to. Maybe he wasn't a practitioner, but certainly was exposed to it and saw it going on around him. Yeah.
It's quite interesting because in his early days, I think he went to, I think it was his son house. I think he actually went to play for them, and he kind of got embarrassed. They didn't think he was very good, and that spurred him to go away and practice and then come back. And it's kind of interesting because there's a big parallels there, because he basically just worked really hard and practiced after thinking he wasn't as good as he was. So, but the fact that it has to be marketed as like it's a miracle and it's just like he just put his 10,000 hours in behind the guitar, basically. But of course, the fairy dust on the top is that he sold his soul to the devil, and I wasn't aware the devil played guitar lessons. You know, didn't even give lessons, so I don't know. But
well, and that's an old traditional myth that people sell them. You know, how many Western writers have done that shtick? That you sell your. I mean, that's what is it? Dante's Inferno, or I mean, we've been talking about selling our souls to the devil for a long time, and this is just the southern, particularly African American version of it that we kind of white culture, white industry, the recording industry, imposed on people. No, he did his homework, and I don't know. I would love to know how. I mean, nobody knows, but you could probably somebody would, nerd would figure it out how many miles he walked from gig to gig.
yeah.
Jumped a train or hitched a ride. I mean, he was indeed a rambling man, not just singing about it. He lived that life, and he just, he really didn't have a home. He just was on the road all the time, and he would go to juke joint to juke joint, and community to community. Had a foster family in Memphis that meant a lot to him and helped over many years. Was kind of a home base that he didn't have in a real home. So, just itinerant soul who miraculously did. I mean, a miracle he got recorded.
Yeah.
Twice.
Yeah.
Two different Texas towns. I mean, he was able to make his way to Austin. He was able to make his way to Dallas, and those recordings were made. It's that happened at all. It is miraculous, and that he survives to us this day. And I can actually, ask my Alexa to call him up, and there he is. I'm just like,
I wonder what you think now. That's incredible, isn't it? You're talking to something
I hope
and
he's
it plays
watching.
music. Probably, yeah. Carla, was there anything you'd like to add to that, Carla?
No, I think that the poem comes back at the very end to by the grit. Okay, we're down to the fourth element, earth. By the grit of his dirt road, dirt farm, mud-lined spirit, and in the name of Robert Johnson, may I dream our devil's music.
It's beautiful. As ever, this is going to be a monumental book when it comes out, Carla. This is a beautiful, beautiful poem. Thank you so much for this incredible session on the legend of Robert Johnson. It's been amazing.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for doing your beautiful bottleneck work. Woo!
Oh, I love it. It's such a nice style to play, So can't wait for the next one, Carla. Thank you so much.
All right, I'll see you again.
Thank you. Bye bye.